The first time I heard the knocking, it didn't sound like it came from outside the platform. It sounded like it came from the ocean itself. We were stationed 6 miles beneath the surface. A steel coffin surrounded by black water older than time, and I'd already started to forget what daylight felt like. They told me there were 11 rules to follow if I wanted to make it back alive, but nobody told me why the rules existed. I didn't believe them at first. Not until the night I saw a handprint press against the viewing glass from the wrong side. I remember the first time I broke one of the rules, and what started knocking after. When I first arrived on the deep-sea platform, I thought the rules were just safety guidelines wrapped in superstition. The crew looked worn down, pale faces, twitchy eyes, and that strange habit of pausing mid-sentence whenever the metal walls groaned. On my first night, while unpacking in my bunk, Chief Engineer Lorna handed me a laminated card. It listed every instruction, 11 in total. She tapped the first one with a chipped fingernail and said, "Read this one twice." It said, "Rule 1, never respond to the knocking unless you hear your name first." I laughed, assuming it was some initiation joke, but her expression didn't change. She told me the ocean here wasn't silent. "Sound travels differently down this deep," she said, tightening a valve beside my bed. "You'll hear things that don't belong to pressure or pipes. You'll think someone's outside. Sometimes you'll even hear them call, but it's not them." Her words settled like a weight in my chest. I tried to tell myself she meant sonar echoes or vibrations from the tether line, but her tone carried something heavier. Later that night, the lights flickered 3 times, a soft pulse that felt deliberate. I stared at the steel wall beside me, listening. The knocking began as a soft rhythm, faint but steady, like someone tapping the hull with a small wrench. I froze. I could feel each vibration through the bunk's frame, sharp and cold, traveling straight through the mattress. My first instinct was to answer, to call out, maybe even ask who it was. But then I remembered what Lorna had said. The sound grew louder, closer, until I could almost feel it pulse beneath my fingertips when I touched the wall. It wasn't random. It was spaced evenly, deliberate, patient. When it stopped, I waited in the dark, holding my breath. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I asked around in the mess hall the next morning, pretending to joke about our friendly ocean neighbors. No one laughed. A diver named Harlan looked up from his tray and muttered, "You didn't answer it, did you?" I shook my head, but I could see something in his eyes. Relief, maybe. He leaned closer, whispering, "If you ever do, it'll start repeating whatever you say." I asked him what that meant, but he didn't respond. He just stood up and left his food half-eaten. Everyone else avoided my gaze after that. Later that day, Lorna assigned me to maintenance duty in Section D, near the outer docking gate. The corridor there was narrow, lined with pipes that seemed to hum under their own rhythm. It smelled of rust and brine. As I adjusted a pressure valve, I noticed fingerprints on the glass viewport. They weren't from the inside. They were pale, long, and slightly smeared, as if someone had been trying to pull themselves in. My breath fogged the glass, and beyond it, only blackness stared back. Then the soft, patient knocking started again, right beside the marks. I backed away, my heart beat loud enough to drown out the air vents. I waited for someone else to hear it, but the intercom remained silent. The knocking stopped, then came the voice. It was faint at first, muffled, distorted by the water pressure, but it sounded human. "Help me," it said, slow and low. I could have sworn it came from right beyond the glass. I took one step closer, whispering, "Who's there?" The moment the words left my mouth, I remembered Rule 1, and dread coiled in my stomach. The voice repeated my words, exactly, but without hesitation. "Who's there?" perfectly matching my tone. The repetition was wrong, like hearing my own voice echoed by something that understood how to mimic but not why. I stumbled back, dropping my wrench, and sprinted toward the hatch. By the time I reached the control panel, the voice was still calling softly, "Who's there?" again and again, perfectly even. I slammed the emergency seal and locked it. When the pressure alarm blinked red, I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely punch in the override. The noise stopped, replaced by a long silence that felt heavier than the ocean itself. That night, I found Harlan sitting alone near the observation dome, staring into the black. The dim emergency lights painted his face hollow. He didn't look surprised to see me. I told him about the voice and the fingerprints, but he cut me off. "It's not a voice," he said quietly. "It's a memory the ocean keeps. It plays back what it takes." I didn't know whether to believe him, but when I looked closer, I noticed he'd stuffed wax into his ears. He saw me notice and said, "You'll need that soon. Once it learns your name, the knocking doesn't stop." I couldn't sleep again after that. Every sound in the dark, every subtle groan of the platform, felt like something testing the walls, searching for weak points. I started keeping my bunk light on, just dim enough to see the outline of the steel door. It comforted me, a small reminder of human warmth against the void outside. Around 3 in the morning, the power dipped again. The bulbs flickered, shadows stretched across the room, and I heard it, faint, careful, polite this time. A single knock, then silence, then another, closer, then in the dark, my own name whispered back to me. Lorna woke me at dawn with a flashlight to the face, and the kind of expression that made me sit up before she said a word. She asked if I'd heard anything unusual during the night. I wanted to lie, but my throat was dry, and the memory of that last whisper, my name spoken from the dark, still made my skin prickle. I told her everything. She didn't look surprised. She only sighed, rubbed her temples, and said, "Then tonight you follow the second one to the letter." She handed me a thin black tarp folded into a square, already damp with condensation. The tag stitched to the edge read, "Rule 2, keep the viewing glass covered after 2200 hours. She said it like a bedtime routine. Nothing dramatic, but her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the tarp under my arm. I followed her through the corridor toward the observation dome, the narrow hallways hissing with recycled air, and the low hum of generators far below. We passed Harlan on the way. He didn't speak, just stared at us with the wax plug still wedged in his ears. Lorna ignored him. When we reached the dome, she pulled a lever that sealed the inner hatch behind us. The outer glass shimmered faintly under dim blue light, the ocean pressing against it like a living thing. I asked her what the tarp was for, but she only said, "Because sometimes the dark looks back." During the day, the dome was almost peaceful. Pale light filtered from the surface, enough to cast thin silver patterns across the steel floor. But once the sun vanished, the black water swallowed everything. The lights from the platform barely reached 5 meters out before dissolving into nothing. I spent that afternoon cataloging coral samples, trying to ignore the subtle rhythm of the currents against the hull. Still, every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing toward the dome. It was hard not to. That transparent wall was both our pride and our curse, a perfect window into a world no one was meant to see. At 21:50 hours, I went to the dome to perform the nightly cover procedure. The tarp felt heavier than it should have, as if it absorbed the humidity and the tension hanging in the air. Lorna joined me, clipboard in hand. We secured the top hooks first, then pulled the fabric down slowly until the view outside disappeared behind folds of darkness. I didn't realize how much that view comforted me until it was gone. "Feels worse now, doesn't it?" she said quietly. I nodded. The tarp muffled the faint hum of the ocean, turning the room into a claustrophobic silence. We waited a few minutes before leaving, checking the seals twice. That night, I tried to convince myself that the rule was just psychological, a precaution against panic from staring too long into the abyss. But sleep wouldn't come. Around 22:30, the faintest vibration rippled through the walls again, like the ocean reminding us of its weight. I sat up, staring at the ceiling, and told myself not to check the dome. Yet some stubborn, foolish part of me needed proof that the tarp was enough. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way through the corridor. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the hum of the pumps had deepened into a slow pulse. When I reached the dome chamber, the door's handle was cold to the touch. The emergency light inside flickered, and for a brief second, I saw the tarp move. Not flutter move. It bowed inward slightly, as if the pressure on the other side wasn't water anymore, but something that shifted and pressed. I told myself it was the current. I held my breath and watched. Then in one slow motion, the shape of a hand pressed against the fabric from the outside. The fingers were too long, the joints slightly bent the wrong way, and through the thin material, I saw each ridge of its outline tremble, searching. I should have run, but I stayed frozen, caught between disbelief and horror. The hand dragged down the tarp slowly, leaving streaks of moisture as it moved. Then it disappeared, and something lighter brushed against the fabric near the top, soft, deliberate strokes like someone tracing symbols I couldn't see. I stepped back until my shoulder hit the wall. The lights flickered once, then steadied. I turned to leave, but the faintest whisper came from behind the tarp, muffled by both fabric and water. It wasn't a word, just a sound that almost resembled breathing. Slow, wet, patient. When I reported it in the morning, no one laughed or called me paranoid. Instead, Lorna wrote something on her clipboard and asked what time it happened. When I told her, she muttered, "Right on schedule." I asked what she meant, but she walked away before answering. Harlan approached me later and said quietly, "You're lucky you didn't lift the tarp." I asked him what would have happened. He shook his head. "No one who lifts it ever talks again. Not in any language we understand." He said it like he'd seen it before. Maybe he had. For the next few nights, I followed the rule religiously. I checked the tarp seals twice every evening, memorizing every fold and hook, afraid I'd find it disturbed. Still, the more I obeyed, the more it felt like the ocean knew. The knocking didn't return, but I began to hear something new. Small, intermittent creaks from the dome's supports, always around the same hour. Sometimes it sounded like weight shifting against the outer wall. Once it sounded like something dragging metal along the glass. I started sleeping in my uniform, just in case. On the fifth night, the noise stopped completely. The silence was worse. Around 22:03, the platform lights dimmed for the nightly power cycle, and I noticed something strange. My reflection in the glass corridor window didn't match my movements. It lingered half a second too long, blinking when I didn't. I turned away fast, my chest tight, trying not to panic. The sound of water pressing against the hull grew louder, as if the ocean itself had drawn closer, listening. That was when I realized that even if the tarp stayed in place, it didn't mean whatever was outside couldn't still see us. The next morning, when I walked past the dome on my way to the lab, I saw something that stopped me cold. One of the tarp's corners was wet, not with seawater, but with something darker, thicker. Lorna was already there, staring at it, her jaw set. She didn't speak as she clipped the edge back into place, but when she turned, I saw fear in her eyes for the first time. "We'll reinforce it tonight," she said softly, "and you stay away from the dome until then." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I didn't argue. That night, I stayed in my cabin, pretending to read mission logs. Around 22:15, the power flickered again, and for a split second, every light went out. In that sliver of total darkness, I felt it, a faint vibration, not through the walls this time, but through the air itself, like the platform had inhaled. When the emergency light snapped back on, I noticed the reflection on the porthole beside my bed. There was movement behind me, something standing just outside the dome chamber door. I turned my head slowly. The light above the hatch blinked red once, twice, then stayed steady. And then, from deep within the platform, something started knocking again. By the time morning came, no one pretended to have slept. The air on the platform felt heavier, the recycled oxygen sharp in my lungs. The engineers said the readings were normal, but everyone kept glancing at the walls like they expected them to breathe. I tried not to think about the knocking from the night before, but the rhythm still replayed in my head, slow, deliberate, almost conversational. When I went to the mess hall for coffee, I found a small note taped to my locker in Lorna's handwriting. Rule 3. Never respond to a voice that sounds like someone you know. No explanation. Just that. I crumpled it up and told myself it was another psychological precaution, the kind they used to prevent isolation panic. But deep down, I already knew better. That evening, the tension aboard the platform reached a strange kind of quiet. Harlan hadn't shown up for his shift. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew where he'd gone. The dome. Lorna tried to raise him on comms, but all we heard was static and faint distortion, like someone breathing too close to the mic. Then faintly, beneath the static, we heard him whispering something that didn't make sense. He said my name. Not once, but 3 times, his voice slow and wet, as if his lungs were filling with water between each word. I froze where I stood. The others stared at me, and then the voice said it again, louder this time. I didn't move. I told myself it was a recording or feedback, but the comms technician swore the channel was live. I wanted to respond, to ask him where he was, but Lorna grabbed my wrist so hard it left a mark. Don't, she said, her voice low and shaking. If you answer, it knows you're listening. That word, it slipped out of her mouth like something she'd been trying not to say. The static on the radio deepened into a strange resonant hum, a frequency that made the metal in the walls shiver. Then just as suddenly silence. No voice, no breathing, just the faint hiss of dead air. We found Harlan's headset 2 hours later outside the sealed dome chamber, still plugged into the wall, still wet. The security logs showed no movement in or out since midnight. Lorna ordered the door welded shut. She didn't explain, and none of us asked. But that night, around 22:30, as I sat alone in my cabin, someone knocked softly on my door. 3 slow taps, the same rhythm as before. I held my breath waiting. Then a familiar voice spoke from the other side. Open up, it's me. It was Harlan's voice. Calm, normal. The same steady tone I'd heard every day for months. My chest clenched. Every instinct told me to move, to speak, to answer. But my mind screamed the words written on that crumpled note. Rule 3. Never respond to a voice that sounds like someone you know. I stayed perfectly still. The handle turned once, gently, as if testing the lock. Then again harder. Come on, man, the voice said, a hint of irritation creeping in. You heard something too last night, didn't you? You saw it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The voice dropped lower, more pleading now. Please, it's cold. I can't breathe out here. It wasn't the words that made my stomach turn. It was the tone. The way it mimicked his hesitation, his exact inflection. Too perfect, like something replaying him, not being him. I clamped my hand over my mouth, terrified it could hear me breathing. Then came a sound I'll never forget. The faint splash of water, not outside, but from the corridor floor. I risked a glance toward the bottom of the door, and that's when I saw it. A thin line of seawater creeping under the crack, spreading across the floor in slow pulsing waves. The voice on the other side spoke again, but this time, it wasn't Harlan anymore. It was Lorna. It's okay, she said softly. You can open it now. I almost did, almost, but something in the way she said it didn't feel right. Her tone was too calm, too rehearsed, like she was reading a line she didn't understand. The water reached my boots, cold as glass. I forced myself to back away, step by step, until I was against the far wall. The knocking stopped. The handle stilled. Then, without warning, every light in the cabin flickered and went out. Total darkness. For what felt like hours, I stood in the dark, the silence broken only by the slow drip of water from under the door. I counted my breaths until I lost track of time. When the lights finally came back, the floor was dry, the door was locked, untouched. No footprints, no puddles, but on the inside of the metal, pressed perfectly at chest height, was a single wet handprint, fingers too long, too sharp, and facing the wrong direction. I didn't sleep after that. No one did. The next morning, Lorna looked 10 years older. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice hoarse. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. You didn't answer, did you? She asked quietly. I shook my head. She nodded once. Good. Then it doesn't know your name yet. That word, yet, has lived in my head ever since. After what happened with Harlan's voice, the platform felt like a tomb that refused to settle. Every sound, the hum of the air recycler, the creak of pressure on the walls, carried an edge of threat. No one wanted to admit we were terrified, but fear had a smell down here, metallic and stale. When Lorna posted Rule 4, always keep one light facing the main viewing window after midnight on the control board, no one questioned her. We didn't ask why the light mattered, or who wrote the rule in the first place. We just followed it. And yet, a small part of me wondered, what happens if that light ever goes out? That night I volunteered for night watch. Maybe I wanted proof that all of this was just deep-sea paranoia. The viewing dome loomed like an open eye, gazing into endless black. The floodlight outside the glass carved a cone of pale blue into the water, dusted with drifting plankton. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like staring into the lungs of something asleep, something that might notice me if I blinked too long. Midnight came and went in silence, until the light outside flickered once, then twice. Then it died. The dark swallowed everything beyond the glass. I reached for the backup switch, but the console sputtered, unresponsive. The emergency bulbs along the walls dimmed to embers, leaving only my reflection in the window. At first, I thought the reflection blinked because I did. Then I realized it didn't move at all. My breath fogged the glass, and the fog stayed there, spreading wider even though I'd stepped back. My reflection was breathing without me. That's when the radio crackled. Control, this is observation. Light failure in Dome 1, I said. My voice steady only because I forced it to be. Static answered. Then a faint, distorted whisper, leave it off. It wasn't Lorna's voice, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. It sounded close enough to confuse me, far enough to feel wrong. My hand hovered over the switch again, and through the dead light, something moved outside, a slow drift, like a shadow carried by current, but the ocean was still. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of the dark. The shadow drew closer, and the faint outlines began to take shape. A hand, a shoulder, the curve of a helmet, a diver suit. My pulse hammered. No one was scheduled for EVA tonight. I tapped the glass once, desperate to see clearer, and the thing stopped moving. Slowly it raised its hand and tapped back, the sound echoing through the hull, not like metal, but like skin against skin. I stumbled backward, reaching for the console. The power flickered, lights bursting to life with a sharp buzz. The floodlight outside flared again, cutting through the dark. The figure vanished instantly. All that remained was a murky swirl of sediment. I leaned closer to the glass, heart racing, and then saw it. A faint imprint on the outside of the window. 5 fingers, too long, the same shape I'd seen on my cabin door. When Lorna arrived, she didn't even look surprised. You turned the light back on, she said. Her voice was flat, almost relieved. I nodded, confused, and told her what I'd seen. She shook her head. That's why the rule exists. When the light's on, they can only watch. When it's off, she didn't finish. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the last bubbles of silt faded into nothing. They get closer. We reinforced every backup generator that night. No one questioned the logic anymore. But later, When I passed the dome again on my way to sleep, I noticed something small pressed into the condensation along the inside of the glass. 3 perfect letters, drawn by a fingertip from the inside. My name. I wiped it away and didn't tell anyone. Sleep became a luxury no one could afford after the viewing window incident. The crew moved through the corridors like ghosts, eyes sunken, faces drawn tight. Lorna added Rule 5. Never enter the storage bay after 3 a.m. to the master log. The next morning, her handwriting shaking. No reason, no discussion, just another quiet command scratched into metal to keep us alive. I didn't ask what she'd seen down there, but when the 3rd night came, I learned for myself, because curiosity in isolation isn't just dangerous, it's hunger wearing a human face. I was on maintenance duty, checking pressure valves in the east corridor when I heard the clang, a single metallic crash echoing from the lower deck, the storage bay. My watch read 3:07 a.m. I froze mid-step. My first instinct was to call it in, but the comms had been cutting out every night after 3. The rational part of me said to turn back, to follow the rule and forget I'd heard anything. But something in the sound didn't match machinery. It was too heavy, too deliberate, like something moving boxes one by one, stacking them with intent. The stairwell leading down to the bay was darker than usual. The motion sensors didn't trigger until I was halfway down, and even then, the light blinked in short, sickly bursts. The air was damp, wrong, even for this deep. I could smell salt, real salt, not recycled humidity. The bay doors were ajar, a faint mist curling from the gap like breath in cold air. "Lorna," I whispered, but my voice sounded thin, eaten by the room. No reply. I pushed the door wider. The lights inside flickered, revealing rows of crates, tools, and equipment, all perfectly still. Nothing moved, but when the light blinked again, the arrangement had changed. Crates that were stacked neatly seconds ago now stood in uneven columns, some turned sideways. I stepped closer, my boots echoing against the metal floor. The air had weight to it, like the moment before a wave crashes. I crouched near one of the open containers. It was filled with water, seawater, rippling gently even though the room was sealed. Then I heard it, a dragging sound, wet and rhythmic. I turned toward the far corner where the light hadn't reached. Something tall shifted in the dark, a shape bent at the middle, like it was folding itself smaller. The smell of brine thickened, burning my throat. I took a step back and my boot splashed. The water was spreading across the floor now, shallow but rising. The figure straightened slowly, and I saw a glint of something metallic on its head, a diving helmet. "Who's there?" My voice cracked on the last word. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head, the glass faceplate catching just enough light to show what was behind it. Not a face, but a pale blur swirling like fog trapped in a jar. The helmet began to creak, twisting, the metal groaning, as if something inside was pushing against it from within. Then it stopped. The water reached my ankles. I ran. The door resisted for a second, as if suction held it shut before giving way. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the main corridor, the floor was dry again, my boots leaving no wet prints. I slammed the bay control shut and keyed in a manual lock override. The indicator light turned red. I stood there, shaking, staring at the sealed door. Then came the sound of metal knocking from the other side. Not random, patterned. The same rhythm as the first knocking we'd heard outside the platform. Lorna found me an hour later, still standing there. When I told her what happened, she didn't look surprised. She just said, "You heard them moving again, didn't you?" I nodded. Her voice went quiet. "That's why we keep the bay sealed. They like the cold metal. They gather there when we sleep." Later, when I returned to my quarters, I saw my maintenance log still open on the desk. The last entry was time-stamped 3:28 a.m., a full 15 minutes after I'd left the bay. Under my own handwriting, someone had added a single line, "Don't come back down here. We're still counting boxes." I didn't sleep that night, either. The next day, the welders reinforced the storage doors with triple bolts. But that evening, before lights out, I passed by the control board and saw something new written beneath the other warnings. A faint line scrawled in Lorna's hand, trembling. If you hear them stacking again, it means they're not outside anymore. By the end of that week, our days had begun to collapse into one another. The clocks worked, but time itself didn't. Every sound, every breath, felt measured, stretched by the pressure of the miles of ocean above us. The intercom became our only comfort, a thin thread connecting each of us in our separate compartments. So when Lorna wrote Rule 6, do not use the intercom between 2:30 and 3 a.m. on the whiteboard, none of us understood why. She didn't explain. She only erased the emergency broadcast schedule and replaced it with a note that said, "Silence keeps us invisible." It was the 5th night when I forgot the rule, or maybe I didn't forget. Maybe the silence itself pushed me toward the mistake. I was monitoring sonar when the display started glitching, bursts of static lighting up the screen in strange wave-like pulses. The motion detector flagged movement just beyond range, something massive circling the platform. At first I thought it was a whale. Then the reading showed vertical movement, too fast and too deliberate. I reached for the intercom instinctively. "Control to maintenance, control to maintenance," I said, my voice shaking. "We've got motion on." The intercom hissed. A low, sharp hum filled my earpiece, like someone whispering too close to the microphone. Then beneath the hum, I heard another voice, not distant, right behind me. It said my name, slowly, perfectly. I froze. I could still see the sonar blips moving, circling tighter. My throat dried as the voice began to repeat the words I'd just spoken. "Control to maintenance. We've got motion." The same tone, the same hesitation, but twisted, like a recording played backward through water. The pressure gauge on the wall trembled, glass vibrating. Then the whisper turned into laughter, wet, bubbling, childlike. I ripped the headset off and slammed the intercom switch down. The sound cut out instantly. For a moment I thought it was over, but then from the speaker across the room, the one I hadn't touched, a faint voice crackled through. "Don't hang up," it said. I stared at it, unable to breathe. The green indicator light glowed steadily, even though the system was off. A thin trail of condensation began to crawl down the speaker's surface, dripping onto the floor. Then came another sound, not from the speaker this time, but from the ventilation duct above me. The same voice whispering through the air. "You called us first." I backed toward the door, but the sound followed, slipping between frequencies, moving from one intercom unit to the next, like something crawling through the wires. Each speaker I passed flickered to life, hissing softly, breathing. My reflection in the glass panel of the last one was distorted, mouth open, eyes darker than they should have been. The sound of my own voice played back one last time. "Control to maintenance." When I reached Lorna, she was already waiting outside the comms room. "You used it," she said. Not accusing, not angry, just hollow. I nodded, and she shut her eyes. "They hear through signal. That's what they wait for. Sound gives them direction." She turned off the master circuit and disconnected every terminal on the deck. For the next few nights, we lived in absolute silence. No radio chatter, no background hum, just the steady heartbeat of machinery keeping us alive. It should have been comforting, but the quiet only made the whispers louder in my head. Every time I passed a dead speaker, I swore I could see condensation forming around it, like breath against cold glass. 3 days later, one of the speakers turned on by itself during breakfast. A voice came through, calm and familiar. "Harlan's, you don't have to be afraid anymore," it said. "The static's clear now. We can talk." Lorna smashed it with a wrench before it could finish. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Later, as we checked the circuit boards, we found something that made no sense. The wires weren't corroded or shorted. They were wet, as if water had been running through them for hours. That night, I sat alone in my cabin, staring at the intercom on the wall. It was off, but faintly, barely visible in the metal. Something had etched a message across the surface, not with a tool, but as if burned in by salt water. It read, "You called first." The night after the intercom incident, the air on the platform changed. It wasn't colder exactly, just heavier, as though the ocean outside had found its way in and was pressing against our lungs instead of the hull. Nobody wanted to talk about the message burned into the metal, but everyone had seen it. Lorna wiped it off herself, her hand trembling, muttering that salt can't burn steel. Later she posted Rule 7. If you see your reflection move on its own, look away immediately. None of us laughed at it. Down here, reflections were part of life. The observation dome, the control monitors, even the polished bulkheads threw your image back at you in pieces. But something about the way she avoided mirrors after that made me realize it wasn't superstition anymore. It was survival. I didn't understand the rule until my next rotation in the sub-bay. The lights flickered every few minutes, a pulse that reminded you just how thin the barrier between you and the abyss really was. I was cleaning condensation off the pressure gauge when I caught sight of myself in the reflective casing. It was brief, just a glimmer of movement that didn't match mine. I blinked, wiped the fog, and leaned closer. My reflection stood perfectly still while I moved. Then slowly, it tilted its head the opposite way I did. For a second I froze, rationalizing it. Tricks of light, fatigue, hallucination from isolation. The human brain craves faces, even when it shouldn't. But the reflection smiled. Not a twitch, not a nervous curl, a deliberate, slow smile that didn't belong to me. I stumbled back, heart pounding, eyes locked on the image. The reflection didn't fade. It pressed closer, the metal surface warping slightly as though something was pushing from inside. The smile widened until it stretched too far, splitting the shape of its mouth into something inhuman. That's when I remembered the rule, and forced myself to look away. The instant I did, the air changed. The sound of dripping water filled the room, even though there was none. My skin prickled with cold, and for a moment, I felt a pressure against the back of my neck, like breath on glass. I turned off the gauge light and backed toward the exit. The shadows on the wall behind me didn't match. Mine lagged half a step behind. When I told Lorna, she didn't ask questions. She just listened, her face pale and expressionless. "You looked away, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Good," she said quietly. "It's not about seeing you. It's about being seen through you. Once it knows you're watching, it can use the space between your eyes and the glass." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to. Over the next 2 nights, strange things started happening across the platform. The reflective panels in the sleeping quarters fogged up completely, like someone was breathing against them from the inside. The bathroom mirrors dripped salt water even though the humidity controls were maxed out, and every camera feed that faced a reflective surface glitched at the same time. Static, distortion, then for half a second, a human face where there shouldn't be one. Always smiling, always still. During my shift in the lab, I caught Lorna covering every metal panel with strips of duct tape. "Light bounces too easily down here," she said. "They ride on reflections. They wait for us to see them first." Her voice cracked. That's how Harlan disappeared. He didn't go outside, he went through. Later that night, I was lying in my bunk when I felt the faintest vibration under my pillow, a low hum, almost like a voice buried in the machinery. I turned over facing the wall. My reflection in the glass panel of my bunk door was faint, barely visible in the emergency glow. I told myself not to look, not to test the rule, but curiosity is a parasite in the dark. My eyes flicked toward the reflection. It wasn't me, it was lying the wrong way. I bolted upright, heart hammering, breath shallow. The reflection's eyes opened, slow, deliberate, and met mine. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, as if the glass were liquid, a ripple moved across its surface. My own image began to climb. I shut my eyes and turned away. When I opened them again, the reflection was gone. The glass was perfectly still, but there were fingerprints on the inside of the panel, the same shape as mine. By morning, every reflective surface on the platform was covered or removed. The dome, the glass panels, even the control screens now ran on low light to dull the shine. The others followed without question. Nobody looked into mirrors anymore. But when I passed the sealed dome on my way to the mess that day, I saw my shadow move just slightly out of sync again, and I didn't look back. After the reflections, sleep became a luxury we couldn't afford, but couldn't resist. Fatigue gnawed at us, hollowing out our instincts, until fear felt like background noise. Lorna added Rule 8. If you wake up to someone knocking from inside your cabin, don't open your eyes. She said it softly, almost like a prayer, as she taped the rule above the galley door. I didn't ask who it had happened to first. We didn't ask that kind of question anymore. But the way she avoided looking at the cabin doors told me enough. Down here, the walls didn't always keep things out. Sometimes they learned to copy what was inside. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a dream. 3 faint knocks, not on my door, but on the inside wall behind my bed. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it came from the metal separating me from the ocean. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding. The room was dark except for the slow pulse of the emergency light outside, leaking under the door like the heartbeat of the station itself. I tried to tell myself it was expansion noise, or the water pumps cycling. Then came another knock, this time closer, lower, like fingertips brushing the panel. I wanted to look. Every instinct screamed to turn, to check, to see. But I remembered the rule. I forced my eyes shut and counted my breaths, shallow and slow. The air smelled of metal and faint salt. Then faintly, a voice whispered from behind the wall, my name. It wasn't Harlan's voice this time. It was my own. The whisper came again, perfect in tone, pacing. Even the slight tremor I heard when I spoke. You're awake, it said. You can look now. My chest tightened. I could feel warmth radiating from the wall behind me, like something was breathing through the metal. The mattress dipped slightly, a weight pressing down where no one should have been. Please, the voice said again. It's so dark where I am. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, trying not to move. The knocking started again. Softer this time, rhythmic, almost soothing. Each tap seemed to echo inside my skull rather than the room. And then, silence. I must have stayed like that for hours, afraid to open my eyes. When the shift alarm finally went off, I rolled over and froze. The metal wall was damp. A faint outline of a handprint was visible, not pressed into the wall but bulging outward, as if the metal had been molded from the other side. At breakfast, I told Lorna. She didn't look surprised, just tired. They test us when we're weakest, she said. They find the cracks, when our minds drift between waking and sleep. She poured her coffee and didn't meet my eyes. If you ever look, it's not just you they'll copy. It's everything that remembers you. 2 nights later, Elias, the youngest of us, screamed in his cabin. By the time we reached him, his door was still locked from the inside. Lorna overrode it manually, but the room was empty. His bedding was soaked. The walls were cold and slick like glass. Only one thing was left on his bunk. His name tag, twisted backward as if pressed from the wrong direction. After that, no one slept alone. We moved our bunks into the common quarters, even Lorna. The floor hummed faintly through the night, the steady vibration of machines trying to keep us alive. But even surrounded by others, I woke again around 3:12 a.m. The lights were out, the air still. Somewhere near my head, I heard it, a single deliberate knock. Not from the wall this time. From the inside of my locker. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, slower, Then a whisper so close it stirred the hairs at the back of my neck. "You're not dreaming anymore." I kept my eyes closed. I didn't move until I heard the morning alarm. When I opened my eyes, everyone else was still asleep, or pretending to be. My locker door stood slightly ajar. Inside, pressed against the metal interior, was a faint outline, the shape of a face, mouth open in a silent scream, stretched from within. I sealed it shut with duct tape before anyone else saw. Later that day, Lorna added another note beneath the rule. If it stops knocking, it's already inside. The day after Elias vanished, the air on the platform felt heavier, like the pressure outside had found its way in. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt it, that silent certainty that something was watching, waiting for a mistake. Lorna gathered us in the galley, her voice low and dry. Rule 9. If you hear someone calling for help through the intercom, confirm they're in the same room before responding. She paused before finishing her thought. Because sometimes, it's not them. The hum of the generators filled the silence that followed, but beneath it, I thought I heard faint static, like someone breathing just beyond the speaker grill. The intercom system ran through every section of the platform: lab, sleeping quarters, observation deck, hydroponics bay. It was our lifeline, but lately, it had started acting strange. Voices would cut in, halfway through a sentence, or we'd hear faint laughter in the background, where there should have been none. Harlan was the first to dismiss it as interference. Salt corrosion, loose wiring, maybe even pressure feedback, he said, pretending not to flinch when the speaker above us crackled mid-sentence. But that night, the system called my name while I was alone in the storage bay. The sound came sharp, sudden, my voice, echoing through the static. "Hey," it said, "I need help down here. The lights are out." I froze. My first thought was Harlan. Maybe he was pranking me, trying to lighten the tension, but the tone was wrong. Too calm, too even, like someone wearing my voice instead of using it. I reached for the transmitter and pressed the button halfway. "Harlan?" I whispered. "Where are you?" Silence. Then "Down here," it replied, softer now, as if trying not to be overheard. "Come quickly. Don't tell Lorna." That's when I noticed the red status light above the intercom switch. Off. The system wasn't broadcasting. The line wasn't active. My stomach dropped. I didn't even touch the mic again. Instead, I ran. When I reached the lab, Lorna was already there, staring at another panel. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she asked, not turning. Her reflection in the viewing glass looked pale, stretched thin by exhaustion. "It knows how to sound like us now." On the table beside her sat one of the maintenance recorders. It was blinking. She hit play. The speaker crackled, and Harlan's voice filled the room. "Help me. Someone please. I'm trapped in the ballast chamber." But Harlan was right there, behind her. He stepped forward slowly, eyes wide, hands shaking. "That's not me," he whispered. "That's not me." His voice on the recording repeated the same plea, the tone identical, even down to the way he paused when nervous. We listened in frozen silence until the voice on the tape added something new, something Harlan had never said. "Bring a flashlight," it whispered, "and leave the door open." Lorna slammed the recorder off and looked at both of us. "It's testing how we react," she said. "It's learning." That night, we shut off the intercom entirely, but it didn't matter. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the faint hiss of static leaking from the speaker above my bunk. My name drifted through it again, softer this time, pleading. "Please, I'm hurt. Just open the hatch." The others were still asleep, so I slipped out quietly, following the sound down the corridor. It grew louder near the main access tunnel, pulsing faintly through the pipes. I reached for the manual override, ready to check, when Lorna's hand caught my wrist. Her face was pale, eyes glassy in the dim red light. "Where are you going?" she whispered. "I heard someone," I said. "It sounded like me," she interrupted. The voice from the intercom spoke again, and this time, it was Lorna, perfectly her. The same cadence, Same brittle tone. "Please, I'm trapped." Lorna stepped back. "That's not me," she whispered. "It's not me." We stood there for what felt like hours, listening to the voice fade into laughter. Quiet, distant, bubbling up like something underwater. The laughter slowly turned into static, then into nothing. By morning, we disconnected every intercom on the station. Harlan ripped the wires out himself, muttering under his breath. "It knows too much," he said. "It's memorizing us." But even with the system dead, I still heard it that night, my own voice, whispering through the vents. "You should have answered when I called." Lorna didn't even try to sleep after that. By the time we reached the 10th rule, sleep had become a myth, a word we remembered but hadn't practiced in days. Every light flicker, every hum in the ventilation, made us twitch like live wires. The deeper the platform sank into the trench, the more it felt like it wasn't built on the ocean, but inside something vast and alive. Lorna posted the new rule, without a word. Rule 10. Never enter the maintenance tunnels after 3 a.m. No matter what you hear inside. We didn't ask where it came from. We didn't need to. There was already a story behind it. One the ocean had been whispering since the night Elias disappeared. The maintenance tunnels were narrow, twisting arteries that ran beneath the main deck, full of pipes, coolant lines, and darkness. When you walked through them, the sound of your footsteps followed too closely, like something was pacing you just a step behind. Still, we had to check them daily. Power lines needed recalibration, pressure seals required inspection, and down here, the smallest failure could turn the station into a coffin. But we always finished before midnight. Always, until that night, when the alarms went off. It started at 2:57 a.m., a soft beeping that rose into a steady wail. "Pressure drop in the lower tunnels," Harlan said, squinting at the control panel. "If it keeps up, we'll lose hydroflow to the oxygen system." He looked at me. "We need to fix it now." Lorna hesitated. "Wait 3 minutes," she said. "We can't go down there after 3. Harlan scoffed. "We're not going to die because of some superstition." He grabbed a toolkit and disappeared into the corridor before anyone could stop him. The metal hatch slammed behind him, leaving only the echo of his boots. The clock on the console hit 3 o'clock. The siren stopped. Everything went silent. Not quiet, silent, like the sound had been sucked out of the air. Lorna stared at the hatch, her knuckles white around the railing. "He shouldn't have gone down there," she murmured. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The radio stayed dead. When I finally grabbed a flashlight and started toward the door, Lorna's hand caught my shoulder. "Listen," she whispered. Faintly, from beyond the metal, we heard Harlan's voice. "I fixed it," he called. "It's fine now. Come down and help me reset the flow valves." Relief flooded through me, until Lorna shook her head. "That's not him," she said. "Harlan never calls anyone for help." She was right. I'd known him for months, and he was stubborn to the point of arrogance. But that voice, it was perfectly him. Even the rasp in his throat, from the recycled air. "We have to check," I said, more to convince myself than her. I opened the hatch. The tunnel stretched ahead, tight and dim, the smell of rust heavy in the air. My flashlight cut through the darkness, catching droplets of condensation sliding down the pipes like sweat. "Harlan," I called. "Say something." The reply came instantly, from somewhere deep within the tunnel. Down here, the beam of light caught movement, a shadow ducking around a corner. "You took long enough," it added, a half laugh in its tone. That's when I noticed the pool of water at my feet. It rippled once, twice, but the air down here was still. Lorna's voice hissed through my earpiece. "Don't go further." I wanted to listen. I did, but curiosity is a cruel thing, and fear sometimes feels too much like gravity. I took one step forward, then another. The tunnel walls seemed to pulse, the pipes thrumming faintly, as if carrying a heartbeat. The further I went, the colder the air became, until my breath came out in mist. The smell changed too, less like oil, more like something organic, decaying. Then I saw him, or at least, something that looked like him. Harlan stood at the end of the tunnel, his back to me, one hand resting on the valve wheel. "Almost done," he said. His voice echoed wrong, hollow, layered, as though more than one mouth was speaking through it. "We'll be safe soon." I stepped closer, light trembling in my hand. "Harlan, stop," I whispered. "Turn around." He did, slowly, too slowly. And when his face came into view, my knees almost gave out. It was Harlan, but his eyes were gone, just smooth, pale skin stretched where they should have been. His mouth smiled too wide, his teeth too sharp in the flickering beam. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "It's not your turn yet." The air around him warped, like heat distortion underwater. Then he stepped forward, and the tunnel lights burst to life all at once. I stumbled backward, blinded. When the spots cleared from my vision, he was gone. Just gone. The valve behind him was cracked open, dripping something dark and thick, not water. I bolted for the exit. When I reached the hatch, Lorna was there waiting, her face pale but unsurprised. "You saw him," she said quietly. I nodded. "No," she corrected, voice trembling. "You saw what wanted you to think he was him." We sealed the tunnels after that, welding the hatch shut. The alarms never went off again. But at night, when the station settles and the lights dim, I still hear footsteps beneath the floor, a steady rhythm, walking the same route I took that night. Sometimes they stop directly below my bed, and sometimes they knock. By the time Rule 11, if you hear knocking from the outside, do not look toward the sound appeared on the board. We'd all stop pretending the rules were precautions. They were commandments. The ocean wasn't quiet anymore. It spoke to us in sounds the hull wasn't supposed to make. Distant drumming, faint shivers that traveled up the metal bones of the platform, sometimes soft enough to think we imagined it. But then came the nights when the sound wasn't distant at all. It came from just beyond the glass, steady and deliberate, knocking, always in threes. Always when someone was alone. The first to hear it was Lorna. I woke to her voice over the internal comms, shaky, out of breath. "Someone's outside the dome," she said. I ran to the observation deck, heart pounding. She stood frozen by the viewing window, staring into the dark. Her flashlight lay on the floor, still rolling. "Don't look," she whispered when I reached her. "Please don't." I forced my eyes forward anyway. The water was black, still and empty, but the sound was there. 3 slow knocks, spaced evenly apart. The metal beneath my feet vibrated faintly with each one, as if the entire platform was being tapped by a giant finger. Lorna turned her face toward me, tears streaking down her cheeks. "It's been doing it for 5 minutes," she said. "I tried to check the cameras, but they're all static. It's like it wants me to look." She pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head. "It sounds like my father." The knocking came again, louder this time, and somewhere deep inside the structure, another answered it, like an echo, or something moving in rhythm from below. My flashlight flickered. Then the glass of the viewing dome breathed inward, just slightly, as though something on the other side had leaned close. I grabbed Lorna's arm and pulled her away, but she didn't move. "What if it needs help?" she whispered. The words hit me like a blade. I remembered the voice I'd heard through the intercom, the one that sounded like me, and realized whatever was outside, it knew what we wanted to hear. I dragged her from the room and sealed the hatch. Behind us, the knocking grew frantic, as though it knew we'd turned our backs. Then silence. The next morning, Harlan was gone. His bunk was empty, his tool belt missing, his tablet still open on the counter. No sign of struggle, no alarms, just gone. We replayed the camera feeds for hours, but every recording after 3 a.m. was corrupted. White noise and faint, rhythmic thuds beneath it, the same 3 knocks. We tried to keep working, but something had changed in the air. It was thicker, heavier. When I walked through the corridors, I could feel vibrations through the floor. Subtle, almost inaudible, like the station itself was breathing. That night, I didn't sleep. None of us did. We gathered in the galley, lights dimmed low, trying to distract ourselves with conversation. That's when the knocking returned. 3 knocks, then silence. It came again, louder, closer, from the wall directly behind us. Everyone froze. I could see the panic in their eyes, the way they all silently begged someone else to say it was just the pipes. But we all knew better. Lorna clutched her cross, whispering under her breath. The sound came a third time, not from the wall now, from the floor. The metal rang like something massive had touched it from below. I counted the seconds between each one. 4, then 5, then nothing. The quiet was worse than the noise. When I finally dared to move, I made my way toward the main corridor. The platform creaked beneath my feet, a deep, low groan, like pressure adjusting. But then came the sound again, softer, gentler, knocking, from the viewing dome. I stopped breathing. My flashlight beam trembled as I turned the corner. Even though I knew the rule, I wasn't supposed to look. I knew it, but curiosity, that curse we all shared, dragged me forward. The glass shimmered faintly in the dim light, condensation beading along the edges. For a moment, I thought I saw a handprint, 5 long fingers pressed against the outer curve. Then it faded. I took 1 step closer, whispering to myself, "Don't look," but I already was. That's when something moved in the dark. At first I thought it was a trick of reflection, my own silhouette rippling across the glass. But then it leaned closer, and I realized it wasn't reflecting me at all. It was taller, thinner, its outline shimmering like heat distortion underwater. A faint shape of a face appeared, human, almost, but wrong. Its mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear. My ears rang, my vision blurred. The knocking started again, not from the outside now, but from the inside of the dome. I stumbled back, screaming for Lorna, but the sound that came out of my throat wasn't mine. It was deeper, slower. The thing on the other side mirrored me perfectly, its mouth moving in sync. Then the lights failed. When I came to, I was lying in the corridor, my flashlight still on. The dome was empty. Lorna was gone. Only the condensation remained, streaked into a trail that led down the hall toward the airlock. The log showed it opened once, for 6 seconds at 3:33 a.m., then sealed again. No water intrusion, no trace of anyone, just silence. Now I'm the only one left. The platform's been dead quiet for 2 days. Power's fading. I keep hearing tapping near the hull, faint and patient. I don't answer. I don't look. But sometimes I think I can feel it. The vibration of fingers against the steel, following wherever I go. And last night, just before I fell asleep, I heard something new. It wasn't knocking. It was breathing, right beside me. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.